Dairy animals need to produce offspring to start their milk production. And in this video, I'm going to talk about ways that you can get the most profit from these young animals. The magic of the birthing process is often one of the most exciting events on a homestead. And because of this, then a lot of people get very attached to their animals that are born on their farm. And it's hard for them to let go and, sell them to other people. And because of this, a lot of people don't stay in homesteading very long. They end up keeping too many animals, and pretty soon they get overwhelmed. They have more milk goats than they can milk, or they have more sheep than their pasture can hold. And they end up just selling them all, or else sending them all to the butcher and being done. And the reason I'm making this video is to help you avoid that problem. If you're a new homesteader, a lot of times it's hard to know what to do with these excess animals. I'm going to start out by talking about ways to make your young animals more valuable in the first place. And one thing is to start out with your breeding stock. A lot of times then we'll just go buy an animal because it's cute, or we just fall in love with it when we first see it. But if you look at it a little more analytically, when you begin, you might end up getting a lot more money for their offspring in the long run. One of the things that I noticed that no one cared about in my area when I was selling my baby goats is nobody wanted the registration papers. Part of the reason I was getting a good price was because people liked the idea of being able to register their animals, even though they didn't want to do it. And so if you're offered registration papers, my suggestion is that you take them, because it could end up bringing in hundreds of dollars more in the long run just because you have registration papers. Another thing is having a semi-unusual breed, and by semi-unusual I mean a breed that is well known in your area but not a lot of people have. I had Saanen goats, and I bought 2 out of my 3 goats inside of the county that I lived in. So they were a breed that people were familiar with and that I knew that there was a market for. If I would have bought something like cashmere goats that I would have had to import from a long ways away and had no idea whether or not anyone was interested in this kind of goat, I might have had a lot different outcome with trying to sell them. Another thing to consider is conformation and genetics. If you know a lot about livestock and are able to choose good livestock, a lot of times you can go to a farm that does have a lot of excess animals and the people are just ready to get rid of them, and you can choose out the best ones and usually get them for a better price. Or you can go somewhere like a dairy that has a lot of excess calves or a lot of excess goats or sheep, whichever kind of dairy it is. And if you have someone that is experienced with you, or if you have some experience with choosing animals, a lot of times you can find a good animal for a lot less than you would pay for it from a private person that was selling their animals that are kind of more emotionally attached. The first cow that I bought was from a dairy out of state, but it was up by where my daughter lives. And I'd taken my son-in-law with me to look at privately owned cows that he wasn't very impressed with. And so a few days later my daughter decided that we needed to drive up into Idaho and look at cows up there, and we found a dairy. The owner of the dairy was very knowledgeable, and he had production records on his cows. I could look at the cow's mother, I could look at her father. I was looking for a cow that was going to mature kind of small, and so I was happy that her mother was kind of small. The cow that I ended up purchasing, I got her for about $400, and the ones that I'd looked at with my son-in-law were about $1,200, and I don't think that there was a huge difference between them. One thing that was really good about the cow that I got, as far as genetics, I tested my cow. It didn't cost a whole lot of money, but it did cost some, and it was a little bit of trouble, not a whole lot of trouble. But I did take the time and spend the money to do the test, and found out that she was A2, which that protein is the same as goat milk and sheep milk and most other milk in the world. The A1 beta casein is a mutation. I just know for me personally that it causes allergies, and I do a lot better if I completely avoid A1 beta casein. I can do butter, I can do cream, I just can't do things that are high protein. Because I knew that my cow was A2, when it came time to sell her, then I was able to get more money for her. And if I would have bred her to another A2 animal, then I would have been able to get more for the offspring. The cow that I currently have, I haven't milked yet because she hasn't had her calf yet, but she's also A2. And I didn't know that when I first got her. I had to do the testing. The next thing that you have to think about with your livestock is whether or not you're planning to grow your herd. Now, if I end up with a heifer calf from the cow that I have now, I went out of my way to be able to breed her to an A2 bull, and so that will also be an A2 heifer calf. And where I'm planning to sell milk, then it might be advantageous to me to be able to have 2 cows that I'm milking, because it doesn't take that much longer to milk 2 cows than it does to milk 1 cow. And with the laws in my area, I can sell up to 120 gallons a month without being a licensed dairy. That's probably as much as my cow would produce altogether, and I want to be able to have some for my family. But most people, when they start out, myself included, don't think that far ahead, and so they're kind of surprised by the number of animals they end up with, especially if they're doing smaller animals like goats and sheep that have more than 1 baby at a time. And they get these animals and they love every single one of them because they've seen them born. They feel an attachment to every one of them. And pretty soon then they're feeding more than they can afford. And if they have pasture, it's being overrun. And so it's not always a good thing. Sometimes you have to set your limits and decide just how much your property can hold. I do not think that my property could support 3 milk cows. If you can kind of make those decisions beforehand so that you know, okay, my property is going to support 5 goats well, and that's all. That way when you get to those 5 goats, if you start out with 2, you keep 1 each year, it's not going to take you very long before you have 5. And if you try to keep all of your females, it's going to be there even faster. When you're getting to sell your animals, there's several options that you have to choose from. My very first goat kids, the way I sold them was by making a flyer and putting it in the feed stores around. And I made one to show you what I'm talking about. Whoops, this is one of my alpacas, and he's not for sale. But this is just, I had a picture of him, so I made this. And as you can see, I put these little things on the sides that say alpaca for sale, $500, call Sally, and then a phone number. Anyway, this was a good way to sell back in those days. I don't know if it still is. I haven't tried it. One of the ways that a lot of my neighbors in the last area where we lived would sell their animals is they'd take them to the auction. But they usually had several animals, and they were trying to get the most money at one time for the amount of time that they were spending. That was their goal. It wasn't necessarily the most profitable way to sell if you had ample time to spend talking to a lot of people. They were usually selling several goats at a time, or several sheep at a time, or several cows at a time. And so it's not a very personal way to have your animal sold. And if you have an animal that you want to have sold as a pet only and not go to the meat market, that's not the way to sell them. Here in Utah, then we have the KSL Classifieds, which is an online site, and they'll let you advertise almost anything on there for free, and it's an easily searched site. It's similar to Craigslist, if you're familiar with Craigslist, but it's much, much easier to navigate and to search. And that's been a really good way to buy and sell things here in my area. Another way to sell is just by word of mouth. And usually it's word of mouth with some advertisements, because with my goats, as I got better at selling them and advertising them, people would watch for them, and how they knew when to start watching for them is because my friends and neighbors would say, oh, her goats are about to be born, start watching, because she'll put them up on KSL, and they were usually gone very, very quickly. A lot of times I had people actually upset that I had run out, because some people would talk to me beforehand and it would just be first come, first serve. I just had to go with who was there with the money at the moment. I actually could have sold a lot more goats than I had. It's just I wanted to keep my milk goats to 2. That was how many I felt like I could handle. Sometimes it's difficult to put your animals up for sale because you feel like you aren't going to get as much money as you feel like they're worth. But if you have something valuable, someone's going to want it. That's been my experience. I've never had a lot of trouble selling animals. And if you've enjoyed this video and learned anything, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel.